with relatively simple steps, things that are not rocket science. They're relatively simple moves forward. So we're looking at how we might go about changing this idea of a relationship between ego and eco. And what I'm interested in then is, in a sense, what do? We continue to think on a planetary level. We continue to think of ourselves as citizens of a planet, but we happen to have a habitat of our own place. So how do we learn about our own place and understand that more profoundly? Well, that's the connection to the natural environment. This is my town. This is where I live. And as you can see, it's a green place. It rains a lot. We live in a lot of valleys in the Pennines. Most of the houses are built in the valley, and they were mainly built in the 18th and 19th century as a result of the cotton industry. It was a very, very big part of the local industry in the region. And the Victorian church in the middle, and the Victorian town hall, and most of the housing stock were built during the reign of Queen Victoria. And what we have, in a sense, is a town that was focused on industry of cotton, this stuff, you know, sent it globally. So there's already, in a sense, a story of being connected around the planet through trade. And what happened as a result of that was that those people weren't given much land because they went and worked in the cotton mills. And they lived in a place with lots of land around it, but none of the people in the town have gardens. Most of these houses are back-to-back houses, they're called. So you can come out the front into a street this side, and you go out the front into a street that side, and there's the dividing wall between the houses in the middle. So you've got two houses built into one block. They're rather like modern flats, if you like, but on a level. And so it's an interesting area because you've got the contradiction of huge amounts of available land around, but it's privately owned, and a few little pockets of public land which tended to be managed by the local authority at quite a lot of money. It costs them £1.2 million a year to cut the grass in our town. And we've said to them, forget it. We don't want you to cut the grass. We'll spend the money better on growing food. So the local authority started to talk with us now about changing a relationship that they previously had with the town, which was to do things on behalf of the town. And now we're looking at a different form of governance where the town goes to the local authority and says, we have certain structures and systems in place. Incredible Edible is a charity, okay? And we will take on board the responsibility of managing our town as a community. And we'll work out how we're going to do that as people together, and we'll negotiate it. So there's the place, and this, oh, the other thing to point out, and I said this to Prince Charles, all of that up there, all those hills are owned by the aristocracy. One person, Lord Savile, who's now dead, used to come there every year and shoot grouse once a year. And nobody was allowed on that land at all. So I said to the Prince, wouldn't it be interesting if you opened up that for the people here, because we need 212 acres of land to feed our community. We know the data. We know how much room, how much space we need, and we know it's quite possible to do it. And we know it's possible to do it because we're encouraging towns elsewhere to do it as well, and they're auditing it already, and they're beginning to get in that direction. So it's really not rocket science. It's simply about imaginative change. And so one of the things I've been looking at in different parts of the world is how do people do this in different places, and what can we bring back to our own place, global to local. This is centre of Chicago. This was an office block that was dropped 5 years ago and left alone. The community around there decided it was a wasted space and they wanted to grow something, and they now have a very, very productive 2-acre site that feeds quite a lot of people for that community right in the middle of the city. It's an interesting point of reference, if you like, for what I described about in China, and I'll come to China later on, but in the middle of a city. And the point is this, that we need to, in a sense, shift the consciousness. We need to get people to think not just about globalization, about trade, but actually think about that bit, the eco, the planetary consciousness. And if we grow things in cities and we start to demonstrate it, we have other added benefits. There's already evidence in some of the growing projects in some parts of the world that by growing food in cities, you reduce the temperature of the cities. So you've already got benefits coming in. The second thing is you increase the soil fertility. You bring in more biodiversity. The natural world comes back into place. There's more butterflies, more bees. All of those things which in a sense are part of the living ecosystem that are critical for us to survive. If we don't have bees, pollination is 80% less likely. So you have all these connecting factors that start to allow people to take their own little journeys into these stories and understand them from the point of view of contacting and connecting with the natural world right in the middle of cities. So it's building a cultural perspective, if you like. And the third bit about this is then thinking in terms of time. The whole idea of the commodity-driven world is that what I buy today is redundant tomorrow. You know, I'll get an iPad, it'll be brilliant, but then there'll be a better one 6 months later, and a better one 6 months later. So I throw that one away. And Apple make all that wonderful stuff about brilliant design. But do you see that thing decomposing? Does it come into food for something else? Does it become a resource that we can use again, or do we have to just chuck it away? You know? So we have to think really, really hard about the loop that we're creating in terms of our economic models to enable us to get towards 2100. Otherwise, we'll have landfill up around our necks and we'll be scrambling around trying to get between the dead iPods to get to work. It's a crazy, crazy idea. Think of it just in terms of little things, pens, toothbrushes, all those things that we have, that once we've got them, we throw them away because they're no use to us anymore. And we get another one. That has to go somewhere. And if it goes into landfill, it goes in for 500 years. Plastic takes about that long to break down. And it never, ever breaks down completely because it's not biologically structured to do so. We have to therefore think about the re-engineering of those things into other products. So we reuse them for other purposes. We redesign them. There's all sorts of intelligent things we can do to get us into an economy that's not just make, waste, or make, use and dump, but it's actually about make, use, recycle, redesign, redevelop, reuse. And we get into a loop in our economic model that enables us to think forward that's ecologically sound as well as environmental, as well as practical. So thinking 2100 is not just crazy, because kids that are born now are very likely to live until 2100. So what we're thinking about in our project is how do we introduce a literacy, a planetary consciousness to those children so that they understand what sustainability is really about in terms of its ecological importance, and that they begin to participate in that from a very early age. When they come into the school, they're encountering that in the whole environment that school provides them with. The other thing about that is, of course, that it means that we can look at assets, resources that our communities hold, not on behalf of profit-making organisations, but they hold them on behalf of their communities. So we're looking at land as our primary resource in our community, because we know that if we get enough land, we can grow quite a lot of food within our community that can serve for us and for the people around us. And you build that up as a set of overlapping relationships. And you begin to see that asset transfer into established organisational frameworks like charities, like community interest companies, is a sensible way of starting to put structures in place within local communities so that it can become an intergenerational handover of resources and ideas. So this thing becomes something like a series of connected webs. The project itself at the moment is simply focused on the food issue, but there's obviously other things you can do. But we started there and we just say, add willpower. We're absolutely open in this project to ideas. People can come from any part of our community with something, and we will support them if they can justify its link to food in some way. And it can be quite varied in how they get there. We're interested in three primary areas at the moment. The idea of building a community, the idea of building a sustainable form of business, and the idea of how that connects into learning in its broadest sense, both school and community-based learning. And the overlaps then become quite interesting.